Hello and welcome to the show. This episode is about water and sustainability. This is a key issue at the moment in the world, and the reason behind this episode is just to highlight some of the challenges that we're facing as a species at the moment.
There is a global water crisis, and it's something that we need to be much more aware of in the Western world, where we don't really see the effects of this on a daily basis.
Recently, I came back from a trip to Las Vegas in the US. Part of this trip, I visited Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, and our guide was explaining to us that the water level in Lake Mead is at one of the lowest points in its history since the Hoover Dam was constructed. It's at possibly the lowest point in almost 90 years. Lake Mead provides water for so many places in the Central Americas. It provides water for Nevada, for California, for Arizona. I think the majority of the water in northern Mexico comes from the Colorado River. If this lake is running dry or running low, this is, of course, a really potentially serious problem for a lot of people. Other places in the world are also experiencing drought and a lack of water. This is mostly due to climate change and population pressures. For example, South Africa, which was another place that I was fortunate enough to visit this last year, has had a water crisis recently. While I was there, I met with Paulette Van Heerden, who works for an NGO called Water for Cape Town. She was explaining to me some of the challenges that they face in South Africa and how they're trying to combat these challenges. So the first part of the episode is a quick interview with her, just explaining some of these themes that are associated with drought and water crisis in South Africa.
The sound quality of this recording wasn't the best because we were recording in a busy hotel lobby, so I hope that you can forgive me for the sound quality of the first part of the episode.
The second part is an interview that I did when I came back to Copenhagen with Mikkel Hall, who is the head of water resources in Copenhagen, Denmark. It was generally talking about how to make effective policy to ensure longevity of our water resources, particularly focus on South Africa and how they can potentially improve their water resources. Also just learning in general how we store our water and how we collect our water, and I think this is something that is really interesting and something that we need to be aware of in general, because without water there is no life.
So without no further ado, I give you episode number 1 of the HPM podcast.
So my name is Paulette Van Heerden and I am the chairman of Water for Cape Town. We're a non-profit organization. We're a year old exactly now. So,
Happy birthday.
Thank you. We came into being because of the drought and realized that we needed to educate Greater Cape Town on how to be water savvy, because reduction in consumption was a mainstay. You know, we had to get the consumption right down.
What I really want to understand is what's happening in South Africa with the water. Obviously, I've heard on the news that there's a crisis, but I don't really understand why and kind of the issues behind it. Right. So maybe you could just explain like an overview.
Sure. It's a combination of factors. We've had 4 years of drought, which we knew were going to come, but we weren't capacitated by national government from a budget point of view, and so that was a political situation.
Okay.
So because the Western Cape is DA, Democratic Alliance, and the rest of the country is ANC.
That's the two political parties.
Correct.
Yeah.
The ANC wasn't that keen to support the DA because the DA is very successful in terms of their civil service when you compare it to the rest of the country. So there's a little bit of a political aspect to it.
So is there a difference between the crisis in the Western Cape and in the rest of the country? Is there less water here?
Well, we've got drought, and we've had it in Durban, we've had it in PE, we've had it in Oudtshoorn, we've had it in Laingsburg. So it's not just particular to the Cape. But the fact that we couldn't access funding from government to look at solutions and implement them 4 years ago just exacerbated the problem.
Sure.
We also have a water department here, notwithstanding the fact that it's DA, that is bankrupt. So they have a water system that's 80 years old and was designed to last 50 years.
Okay.
And so it's in a very bad shape, to the degree that 37% of the water that is dispatched to the end users lost on the way.
Wow. That's a huge amount of water. Wow.
That's a huge amount of water. So
it's a real combination of factors then.
it's a real combination of factors. Our rivers are in bad shape because of mismanagement. We don't use our wastewater as well as we should. You know, we are far behind an international norm. Internationally, wastewater up to 90% is used. Ours is at 10% in the Western
Wow.
Cape. And so there's a lot of development needed there. We don't harvest stormwater at all. We don't reuse water. A small percentage of the water that's dispatched to end users are used as drinking water. Most of it's used for cleaning and other non-essential purposes. And that's actually, I think, where the focus should be in solving the drought. We have a very low level in our dams, and the forecast for our rainfall is bad. We're an arid area, and it's going to get worse. So we should get away from using drinking water or potable water for non-essential services. Now, to rectify that from a system point of view is again a huge investment. Apart from the fact that the current system is very old and in bad shape, and to fix our whole entire water system across the whole country is going to be 800 million to 1 trillion rand.
And I guess leads into kind of what you're trying to do.
So we focus on 3 areas. Firstly, the hospitality industry, because it drives our regional economy. And so we've engaged with hospitality venues to say, let's do an audit of your footprint.
Okay.
Because nobody was aware of the amount of water they were using. It was never an issue before.
Of course. It's not something that you think about
Yeah.
on a day-to-day. You turn the taps on, you flush the toilet,
Exactly.
you have a shower.
Exactly, and you hose down your paving or whatever it is you do. So most of them did well points, to get extra water from the aquifers underneath, because we have a vast aquifer in this area.
And maybe you could just explain what that is.
The aquifer is subterranean water table
Okay.
that you can access by drilling a well point.
So just a lot of water in the ground here,
A
running off the
tremendous
mountains.
amount of water.
Yeah.
But because we're next to the sea, we have to be quite sensitive ecologically, because if we withdraw too much of that water volume, it'll be replaced with seawater.
Okay.
So we can't,
No,
we
you-
have to replenish actually. And so the first thing was to do auto augmentation and say we can get additional water, access to additional water over and above the city system. The next thing was to say harvest rainwater. So, with a big shower you can fill a few tanks, and then
Sure.
you can use that for your sanitation and for your pool and that sort of thing. So we got that in place. And then train the staff on how to use far less water, and then do a water savings plan where you fix slow flow mechanisms, reduce the pressure in your system, put a meter in that logs your usage in a very
Precisely,
detailed
yeah.
way, and then aerators and taps. And if you put an aerator in a tap, you reduce the flow by up to 80%. So you get a mist instead of a steady stream of water. It fulfills the same purpose, but it uses far less water. So that was done.
Yeah.
And then we also said to them, when Ramaphosa, who's the new president, came into being, he made a point about send me, what he meant is that all South Africans should get involved in resurrecting the country post the Zuma era. And I think that is very, very true, because our economy is on its knees because of the 9 years of bad governance. And so what that means for hospitality industries is the regular visitors that come every year to the boutique hotel or their favorite spot, get them involved and say, if you get involved and if you see yourself as an active participant, then you can assist us. So get away from, should we travel to Cape Town? Is it the correct thing to do? How can I actually be instrumental?
Yeah. I mean, we've been here. I've been here 2 weeks, and Jonathan's been here 6 weeks, and I'm seeing everywhere. Please be aware of the water, and we're visiting a lot of these hospitality
industry,
Right.
businesses, restaurants,
Yes.
Airbnb apartments,
Exactly.
bars, and in the toilets they say like we have provided hand wash for you that is like an alcohol hand wash,
Yes.
so you don't need to use the water. We're kind of seeing all these signs everywhere, like use only 50 litres a day, things like
Exactly,
that. And
exactly.
and I think just been here 2 weeks, I can really get a sense of that
Yes.
kind of feeling that we should be saving water while
It's
we're
taken root. It's taken root. So we've also teamed up with a major insurance brand, Sanlam, who's been in the country over 100 years, to award a destination who's done the most in terms of water conservation. So that award is presented for the first time round now in September. And so at the moment we are measuring across the industry in conjunction with Cape Tourism and Fair Trade. So it's a proactive measure to get people to transform.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So that's to optimize and efficiencies and training, so people are aware. How do I save water? What is the most water efficient way of doing stuff that we have done differently all along?
And as you said at the start, it all starts with the education of people and understanding of the
Sensitizing,
problem.
yeah. So water is a scarce resource. That's the first point. The second point is be an active citizen. And the third one is track and measure and optimize, get better over time. But not just in terms of water, also energy. Eskom has been a huge problem for us, our national energy provider, over the last 10 years.
Okay.
Due to bad governance again.
Okay, and just to wrap it up, how do you foresee the crisis either ending, or where do you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you think the problem's going to continue?
Yes, I do. I just want to add to the hospitality industry. We work in microfarms in the townships.
Okay.
Because in the 80s they started all these farms in townships to feed themselves, because of the economy and unemployment. So there are hundreds of these farms who ran dry. So we provide them with water tanks and assist them to on average 5,000 people are affected by one microfarm in the township. So
if that goes dry, then there's a huge problem.
It's a huge problem. So we do a lot of work there, and it's been hugely inspirational because they're run by these elderly black women who are very passionate and really work against all odds to succeed, And then lastly at schools, because schools are always a node into a community.
Yeah.
So we work very closely with Radio Good Hope FM.
Okay.
And we do outside broadcasts. We take the unit onto the school and we do the morning show from 6 to 9 at the school. And it's good because we can interview people on the ground and understand in their community what the issues are. And then we train the school children. We've got education packs so that they can take the message
It's
home.
so important as well.
Yeah. So those are the three areas. In terms of the future, we're re-skinning our brand to take it wide and talk more about sustainability in general, because drought is an outflow of climate change, which is an outflow of mass consumerism and pollution. So we're now taking the narrative much wider to say, don't use plastic, no single use, plant your own veg, eat organic. Be conscious of your carbon footprint, because that ultimately will have a direct effect on drought across the world.
It'll have a snowball effect on everything else.
The Netherlands have had their first drought in history.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. The weather at the moment is really, really warm in Northern Europe.
So by 2050, the globe will have 40% less water than it needs. So we are all in for water efficiency.
Yeah, I think these kind of issues are going to be affecting the rest of the world very soon.
Definitely.
And we all have to be aware of them.
So there's a new movement called 100 Resilient Cities, and they look at redundancy plans to cope with floods and drought, and it's a proactive measure to have a value chain and have a management system in place. So everybody's looking at optimization, and it's great.
Fantastic. And if someone wants to get in touch with you or just learn more, is there a website that they could go to?
Yes, our website's called waterforcapetown with a numeral 4.org.
Yeah.
They can go there and all the information about our programs are there, or they can just get hold of me on my email, which is paulette@waterforcapetown.org.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So that was Paulette Van Heerden from Water for Cape Town in South Africa. And if you would like to hear any more about the projects that Paulette's running, you can have a look on her website at waterforcapetown.org. and that's the number 4. Next, we're going to go and talk to Mikkel Hall in Copenhagen about what he's working on with regards to changing policies to help water sustainability.
Mikkel, welcome to the show. We'd like to just
Thank you.
introduce yourself and say what you do.
Yep, my name is Mikkel, and I work for the Danish Environmental Protection Agency, and my role there is being head of the water department. So I work with water policy and the implementation of it, so making sure that the Danish water utilities live up to the regulation that we make.
Fantastic. And so this conversation is kind of leading on from the interview that we did in South Africa. And so I was learning a lot about the actual crisis that they have in South Africa. And while we were there, we kind of saw the effects of it. For instance, when you're taking a shower, you put like a big bowl in the shower so you don't lose the water. In all the bars and restaurants, they have like a hand wash thing rather than washing your hands with water. So I really saw firsthand the implications of not having enough water in a country or in a town, and what that means to the regular people who live there. How much of a global issue would you say that water sustainability is in a general sense, and where in the world is most affected by shortage of water?
Water is a huge issue. For a number of decades, there's been a lot of talk about oil and how do we get enough oil, and more recently, how do we avoid using too much oil. But the water challenges that we face are much more fundamental and threatening to our way of life than the oil crisis that we've been seeing. Just because we can function without oil, but we cannot function without water.
It's a slightly important.
Yeah,
to have.
absolutely. I mean, this is a fundamental we're talking about.
Yeah.
Oil is a nice to have. So the water crisis is immense, and there is challenges on so many levels to our water supply and to the fundamentals of living in terms of basing our living on healthy water. So.
And where would you say is the most affected places in the world at the moment, if you're going to pick 2 or 3 places that really struggle with this issue?
The most affected places are, first of all, dry places where you already live with lack of water, and if you have an increase in population with a higher demand on water, if you have an increase of wealth, so you start spending more water per capita, and if you have more industry in that area, and if you at the same time have climate change bringing you less water, then you have a severe crisis in your hand. This we're seeing many places in the world. I just came back from India. Large parts of India is very dry, and they're seeing a huge explosion of population, a growth in income and expectation of welfare. An explosion of agriculture that takes a lot of water. So India is one example. Many places in Africa, including South Africa, are very dry, and they see an explosion of population and an increase in wealth and the use of water and the pollution of water. So I'd say many places in South Africa and many places in South and East Asia are some of the most severely hit by these challenges.
So you say that the key factors are population growth and climate change.
Yeah, and the increased demands of increased welfare. Just an example, agriculture is using a vast amount of water relative to other areas of life. It's using around 70% of our use of water goes to agriculture.
And that's for animals and also for crops?
Yeah, for the entire process of providing food for us. Now, when we go from mainly eating crops to eating more meat, that has an impact on climate change, which is very much talked about. But it also has a very large impact on our water supply, because a cow or a pig eats a lot of food, vegetable food that is put a lot of water into. So before we get to eat the food product, a lot of water via the grain that the animals eat have already gone into those animals. So the water impact of eating is going up when welfare goes up and you start eating more meat and more processed food as well, which takes a lot of water. And when 70% of our water supply goes to agriculture, a change in that has a tremendous impact on our lives. So that's a third factor. So climate change, the increased use through more population and wealthier population.
So you mentioned South Africa and India and Southeast Asia being key areas where
Southeast Asia has quite a bit of water because there are monsoons.
Okay. Sorry, East Asia. They're the key areas that have shortages of water. Obviously, we live in Denmark, and I don't really understand the process of how water is collected in general. Would you say that we have any pressure in Denmark for water? And what's the process that we use to actually collect water in Denmark?
We don't have any acute pressure, but that is because we have taken very early action on this. In the 80s, we did. The thing is, in Denmark, we are unique in the sense that we base our water supply 100% on groundwater. Nobody else does that in the world. 100% groundwater. So we don't even touch our riverways.
Just to interrupt you, like I've lived in Denmark for 6 years and I don't think I've ever seen a river.
That's a good explanation. That we have. There's always very short trip for the water to the sea.
Yeah.
So we don't have a long ways to collect it, and so the water doesn't gather in big streams. It's very small streams. So it makes more sense for us to put the pumps into the groundwater than into riverways. Anyway, in the 80s. We saw a lot of pesticides. We saw a lot of nitrates and phosphates in our groundwater, and we started seeing some of our aquifers being running dry. So we started getting scared if we had a sustainable supply of water. So we introduced some policies to protect it that ensures that by now we have, we believe, a sustainable water supply into the next hundreds of years.
Okay.
We're still aware of finding pesticides in the groundwater. We are aware of not overusing the individual aquifers. So there's still strains, but we believe we're managing it sustainably.
Okay.
But that's due to early action and because we don't have desert-like conditions.
It rains a lot.
Yeah.
You mentioned pesticides and pollutants. How safe is the water in Denmark compared to, say, South Africa?
There's a fundamental difference there as well, because Denmark is one of the only countries in the world we do not treat our water before we send it out to the consumer, because our aquifers are kept clean because of this early action that we made. That means that our water is very safe, but actually the water in South Africa is pretty safe to drink as well. But that's because they treat it. You have to kill the germs when you use surface water, especially if you use surface water where you have untreated wastewater going into, which is certainly an issue in South Africa. So the water is safe to drink in many places in the world, including most places in South Africa, but that's because they spend a lot of effort on cleaning it before they send it out to the consumer. The big challenge is places where they don't have the infrastructure of providing treated water, and people go to the local well or to the local stream to get their water, because typically those are also places that don't treat their wastewater, that don't have regulation of how to use pesticides in farming and so on. So there's a lot of pollutants in that water, and that's not safe.
You mentioned wastewater. I know that when we spoke in South Africa with the NGO, they said that one key thing that they're looking at combating is the amount of wastewater that they have, water that's running out of, like when they're treating it and some of the water is lost or some of the water is not collected. Is that something that is going on here in Denmark, or how much wastewater in general is there in the system? You said like 70% of our water goes to agriculture. How much is actually wasted before it even gets used?
there's two different issues here. One is the wastewater. The other one is how much water you lose in your water distribution system. To take the water loss first, because this is a key issue across the world. This is the low-hanging fruit of how to address our water challenge across the globe, is that our water pipes are leaking everywhere. There's illegal tapping of water from the water system. There's leaks. There is like corruption, people paying for personal favors of gaining access to water. So in that sense, there's water lost in many ways, and we're estimating that most places in the world are losing around 40% of the water supply that doesn't go to the consumer that is intended for. 40%. That's the numbers of many places in South Africa. Maybe 30% of that is direct water loss from the pipes.
Just because they're old and leaking.
Yep.
Wow.
And they're underground. They're not visible. So it's out of view, out of mind, kind of issue. But it's not difficult to address. You just do need to do it systematically, and that's something we did address in Denmark. We put in regulation to force our utilities to make sure they don't lose the water. We have we put penalties on our water utilities if they lose more than 10% of the water, and that means that now we're down from some 20-25% to 7% water loss in Denmark.
So this, I'm assuming this is a policy that you worked on and helped implement. So what other policies have you been working on to help the water supply in Denmark, and how does that relate to other countries, for example, South Africa?
Well, we worked with the South Africans on the water loss thing.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Another key effort that we've done in Denmark is the protection of our groundwater resources. Given that we're solely relying on them, we're very dependent on keeping them clean. So we've actually mapped out all our aquifers in 3D modeling. We know all the geological layers above our aquifers, and we know the extent of our aquifers. So we know how the water comes down into them.
Just to interrupt, I have an idea what an aquifer is, but for those people who perhaps don't, could you explain what it is?
An aquifer is the layers in the ground where there's a high concentration of water that is tappable. So if you put a pipe into it and you pump it up, so it's layers in the ground that is saturated with water. It doesn't mean that there's only water. Many people have a picture of this reservoir of water, but it's actually water. Typically, it's sitting in layers of chalk, or sand, but it's like mud where it's fully saturated with water.
Suck it out
and you can suck it out.
The medium.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So sorry, I was interrupting.
No, that's fine. That's
so
fine.
you were saying about the policies.
Yeah, that we mapped out our aquifers. We know how they're replenished from above. We know where those aquifers are the most sensitive to the water from above, and we know how quickly they're replenished. That means we know how much water we can take out, and we know where to protect them on the surface. So the most sensitive areas to our aquifers, we, for instance, compensate farmers for using less pesticides. We grow forest to protect it. So we put all sorts of surface measures in to protect our aquifers. Now, many places in the world, they don't use their groundwater very much, and they see it as secondary quality of water, mostly because they don't have the system in place that we have that makes sure that we use it sustainably and we protect it. And South Africa, in many places, not all over the country, because many places is bedrock, and it's harder to use aquifers in bedrock. but where you have other geological layers, they have a big potential for using aquifers for sustainable water supply. But then they'll need to put in measures of not overusing the aquifers and of protecting them from the surface. That's something we can help the South Africans with, and something we have done in Denmark, where our experiences can be helpful to others.
Okay. Apart from this kind of infrastructure that you can, I guess, teach the South Africans and show them how to use and provide solutions for them, is there any innovation at the moment with new ways or new methods of extracting water or collecting water?
There is. I will put forward something that is being done in other countries, but that we're not doing in Denmark, because it doesn't I don't want to proclaim that Denmark has all the best solutions in the world, or that we can solve the world's problems. Obviously, stopping the loss of water from the pipe is a good place to start. Another obvious place to start is the recycling of water. As soon as we've sent it into the sea, it gets salty, and you can't use it directly for water supply. But if you recycle it, then you're good. So many places in the world are recycling their wastewater. So they filter it, and then they don't clean it completely, but then they filter it to a level where they can use it for agriculture. So first they send it to households and industries, and then they treat that wastewater coming from there, and they reuse it in agriculture.
That sounds like a really sensible way of keeping the water in the system longer.
Yeah, absolutely. Countries like Spain, Israel, they are now up to about 80% of their wastewater is being recycled as for irrigation and agriculture, and that's another no-brainer, low-hanging fruit that just has to be implemented in many more places, and something that they could certainly start using in South Africa.
Okay. Obviously, it's really important to have investment in this sector, and without money, it's very difficult to do anything to help anyone, to improve anything. How important is finance and investment in developing this and in making sure that we have a sustainable water system?
Obviously, it's key, and a big challenge here is that in many countries you have a tradition that water is something that people expect to have provided for free or almost for free. So people pay way less for the water than the actual cost of providing it and treating the wastewater. If the supply of tax revenue going into the water sector is unstable, or if it's even corrupt, and the money doesn't reach the waterworks and the wastewater treatment plants, and they don't charge the consumers very much for the water, then they have no revenue stream to invest in the infrastructure. Thus the leaks, thus the lack of investments in new infrastructure.
So a lot of it is actually subsidized by the government. Yep. Or something like that.
Yeah, and we usually say that governments are willing to charge a lot less money for the water than the people are willing to pay. Water is a fundamental of life, and a lot of households, even if they're poor, are willing to pay more money for their water if the alternative is that they can't rely on their local water supply, and they have to go buy it in bottles, or they have to go collect it in the local stream.
Yeah, or a bucket outside.
Yeah, and there will be spread of malaria or whatever it is or malaria spread by mosquitoes, but other diseases spread by drinking dirty water. So all this to say, the key for me, and something that we're doing in Denmark, is to make sure that people actually pay enough for the water to cover the actual costs of providing it, so that the utility gets the money directly to spend on the water supply. If it goes via the tax system, our experience is that the stream of money runs out, because it's on a day-to-day basis. If you compete with the military or the daycare, they tend to win out, because these are long-term investments in infrastructure for water that is less sexy to do on the short term. So we say that you should ring-fence the money within the water system that is paid for the water.
So it would actually be better to charge people a little bit more for water and reduce the taxes that they pay on something else.
Exactly. So that's something we've done in Denmark. We call it true cost of water. The consumers pay for the full cost of actually protecting the water source, providing the tap water, and cleaning the wastewater is all included in the water price in Denmark. The full cost of this.
Okay, so this is actually one way that you're kind of using as an example to show other places that are struggling with water supply, and one way that they can improve the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me just add to that many places in the world are looking for private investors to help solve their issues with providing clean water, and it can be a solution. It's a dangerous path to tread, because you're giving money people the possibility of making money out of a natural monopoly. There can't be a competition of supplying water. So whoever wins that contract have a monopoly on providing this service. And if they are a short-term thinking company, that unfortunately many are, they are very much concerned about the next quarter, and you are having infrastructure investments where you need to think 50, 100 years ahead, is it dangerous to rely on private investments, even though they might be on the short term better organized and can provide it better. But if you want to keep it as a public service, then you need the revenue stream from actually charging the consumers the cost of providing the water.
Okay, that's obviously a really important. I mean, I at least didn't know that I was paying like a true cost in Denmark for water.
Most people don't know that in Denmark.
So
either.
that's something that's actually
yeah.
quite interesting, and I never had any idea about that. I saw recently that I think they were local municipality figures from China had come to Denmark. I think at the end of last year.
Yeah, there's delegations from different areas of China coming. Several times a year.
Yeah, I know we've kind of said, we've talked a lot about how Denmark has some different ways of doing it to other countries, but would you say that Denmark is like a leader in water sustainability?
Yes, I would say that. That doesn't mean that we are the leader, and it doesn't mean that we have all the solutions, but we have some solutions that are leading in the world. And there is a reason why the new water minister of China just took office last year, and his first trip abroad as water minister went to Denmark, and that wasn't to negotiate a deal or anything. That was to learn. Yeah. So he went to Denmark to learn, and he went to two countries and to Israel because of their experience with reuse of water, as I talked about.
And you said that you went to India recently. I don't know if you're allowed to talk about what you were doing out there, or perhaps you could outline what you yourself work with, and maybe give some general ideas about the policies that you make and the ways that you improve maybe not just in Denmark, but I know that you go around the world and help other countries. So perhaps you could just like to give some examples and ways that you help to improve the water sustainability in other countries.
Yep. Well, the basic thing is that our foreign ministry is supplying money to different areas of government, where Denmark has some solutions that can be helpful to our peers in other places of the world. And we are receiving money to go to 3 different places in the world: South Africa, as I mentioned, to China, and now as a new collaboration we're starting up with the water authorities of India. And that's why I was in India. I was there with the Danish Minister for Environment and Food, which is my boss. Yeah. And to begin with, we're going to start with focusing on wastewater. For instance, the Indians have an ambition to clean up their waterways. Ganges is known as the river of life, but it is
really dirty,
horribly polluted, and it's killing people. And it's a huge problem, because it's a foundation for life for so many people in India, and making a healthier Ganges starts with being able to treat the wastewater from all the metropolises that are spreading or that are growing at the shores of Ganges. So sharing our experience with how to systematically treat all our wastewater is something we'll work with the Indians on.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but I saw recently a story about New York City and how they would like to clean their harbour. And I think it was in the 17th, 18th century when the first New York kind of town was there, and there was some pictures in this article of of the harbour and all these mussel shops that were selling like shellfish. And the story was basically saying that there's a company that are trying to reintroduce shellfish and mussels into the water of the harbour because it cleans the water.
True.
And I don't know if you have any thoughts about this as like a innovative way of both improving an ecosystem and also improving like the cleanliness of water in a harbour or a city.
I don't think that I don't know the technicalities of
course.
this project, but
It is a bit of a tangent.
Yeah, that's fine. But I'd be surprised if it works as a consistent solution to the challenges of the water in around Manhattan. I would go another way about it. Like if introducing mussels is necessary to treat the water, there are some sources of pollution that you need to address, and if those sources of pollution weren't there, the mussels will come back naturally.
Yeah, of course.
So you don't need to introduce them if your conditions are well enough to have mussels. But that said, I mean, if they can grow mussels and they can take some of the pollutants out of the water, fantastic. It's only going to be fractions of the pollutions throwing through.
Okay, just to kind of wrap things off, I saw that the UN had released something called Sustainable Development Goals, and these are kind of goals that they want to achieve by 2020 and 2030. I guess you must be aware of these in some respects.
Yeah, and they're the guidelines for setting the overall targets for many of our efforts around the world, and including in Denmark.
Do you know them off? Because I didn't write them down here, but perhaps you know roughly what they are. And I wrote two down. One was by 2020 was to restore ecosystems relating to water, and by 2030 they want to have water for everyone and sanitation for all. That was what I took from it, at least.
Yeah.
How realistic do you think these guidelines are, or these goals?
The ecosystems by 2020 is out of the question. That's going the wrong way, and it will be still next year in 2020. I mean, we're talking a huge effort just to start improving our water-based ecosystems. So that's a long ways off, but it's doable. Water for all and sanitation for all, that's the same answer, but these are very, very, very good and important ambitions. I believe that the goal for sanitation is that we should double by 2030 the number of people with access to sanitation, meaning wastewater infrastructure to your household. And I believe, this is on the top of my head, but I believe there's 40% now covered by sanitation, so the double is 80%. That's doable, especially if countries like India start introducing or start investing in infrastructure. It's very ambitious, but it's doable. Now the last one you mentioned about water for all. This is a very, very delicate and interesting challenge, and I'll take South Africa as the example again. In the South African Constitution, it says that all citizens have the right to access to water, and that is beautiful. It's a beautiful ambition to have, but it's also problematic in the sense that if you have too many people relative to the water sources available, and if this leads you not to charge the consumers for the water, you might run out. And then if the citizens have the right to this water, how do you solve that? And we cannot just say that all people have the right to water if there is not enough water, and also we need to share the water with other species. We can't be the only species standing. That would kill us as well. So we have to balance that with the needs of ecosystems and the need for the investments needed for providing water for all. I don't know where I'm going with this other than saying that this is a very, very delicate challenge, and it sounds beautiful to say that everybody should have access to clean water, but the implications of actually living up to that, if you don't do it in a way of systematic thinking, might be to the detriment of other species, or to digging our own grave. So we have to do that right.
Do you think that maybe there's a danger in having these goals?
No, I think overall it's a very, very positive thing. We just have to be careful when we address them. But if these goals leads us to more systematically addressing the challenges, then they're definitely a good thing in my eyes. We just can't expect it to be something.
In 10 years, everyone will have water.
Yeah, it takes a lot more than addressing the direct supply of water.
So, just as someone who is an expert in what you in your field in the water sustainability, what do you think we can expect in both the short term and in the long term with water sustainability? Do you think that in the short term we're going to see more people having access to water, or do you think it's going to be more of a long term solution that we see it maybe in 50, 100 years time?
It's going the right way, but we also have an explosion of population across the world. Africa is the best example because that's where the population is growing the fastest. Africa is one of the continents that's hit the hardest by climate change, and Africa sees a lot of internal migration. We feel it a little bit in Europe, but these are just fractions, the people that try to cross the Mediterranean relative to the internal migration between countries in Africa. And which way this will go has a lot to do with how it inflicts our population. I mean, there's many places in the world where wars are happening over water right now. Part of the reason why there's war in Syria is that they had several years of drought in a row before this war started, and they were lacking water in many places in the country, and that was part of what led to the rebellion against the regime, and also what led to fighting between groups in the country. I'm not saying it's the only reason, but it was part of war in Syria.
Okay, didn't know that.
And it will be the reason for many other wars. So to get back to your country, will it improve? Well, certainly depends on if we can address the issue in a way that avoids conflict. Because if you have conflict, the problem's only going to get worse. And this is back to where we started this conversation. How big is the issue of water? I think it's so fundamental that it's also a key factor in deciding the future of our civilization, because we can collapse into fighting over scraps of water if we don't deal with it before the shit hits the fan, to put it
I think
bluntly.
For me this is the overarching issue for me, actually. It's that whether we're going to reach a point where we are sustainable or not. And obviously one way is good and one way is bad. And this is like the most interesting thing, I think. Just from on a personal level, is there anything that we can do as humans in general, like whether you live in Denmark, whether you live in South Africa, wherever, is there something that you can do on a personal level to help the situation?
There's the obvious and easy answer of
Using
stop the
less
water
water.
when you brush your teeth and that kind of things, and that's very good for keeping awareness, but that's drops in the ocean. What you can really do on a personal level is focus on how you consume, and it's very similar to focus on the climate impact of your consumption patterns. There's also a very, very huge water impact on your consumption patterns, and to get back to the agriculture, going away from meat not only has a huge impact on CO2 emissions, it also has a huge impact on your water footprint of your consumption. So be aware of how your consumption affects water is something that we can all do, and which will have a big impact.
I think that's everything. I have
Cool.
prepared for you. But thank you very much for coming on the show. I think it's been
welcome.
really interesting, and appreciate you spending the time to talk to me about it.
So thanks everyone for listening to the show. This is obviously quite a new project for me, so I'd really like to hear your feedback. If you enjoyed it, what you liked, if there's any topics that you'd like me to do a bit of research on and interview someone about, then please let me know. You can contact me via email, and that email address is henrypetermiller@gmail.com. I really try to avoid social media and Instagram and Twitter and things, and this is a new project, so I haven't really got that far yet with regards to social media marketing yet. So if you would like to get in contact with me, email is the best policy. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next show.